Okay, so I want to read to you from the book of John, and there's so many things in here for someone who's interested in the life of Jesus. One of the points that the divine principle teaches that's very different from traditional Christianity is that Jesus did not come to die, that his purpose in coming, the reason that God sends the Messiah is not to make a sacrificial offering of the Messiah to have a condition of 2,000 years of just spiritual salvation and then to be followed by the second coming of the Messiah. When God sent the Messiah, he intended everything to be done by the Messiah at that time. He was not hoping for a second advent. The idea of a second advent or a second coming of the Messiah was only made necessary because the first advent didn't fulfill what God had hoped it could fulfill. The Jewish people had been prepared as well as God could prepare anyone, but they didn't understand the real meaning of what a Messiah would be. They thought the Messiah would come on the throne of David. See, David was the most popular of the Jewish kings. And so he was a great warrior. He'd killed Goliath. He had rejuvenated the Jewish. At that time, it wasn't even Jewish. It was Hebrew. The Israelite nation. Their faith in themselves. His son Solomon became one of the greatest kings of the Middle East. He had 700 wives, Solomon, and 300 concubines. Most of them were political marriages. He was he was trying to make alliances with hundreds of nations. He was considered very wise. But he allowed the temple to become defiled by all the idols and false gods that his wives brought in, actually, into the temple. And so the temple was defiled, and the foundation that God was hoping to use 1000 BC through the life of David and Solomon, the Messiah could have come and been received by a king who then could have introduced him to the people. And so God had allowed the kingdom to exist so that the Messiah could come to a kingdom, and the king could then accept the Messiah and then introduce him to the people, and then the Messiah could become the king. And the Messiah should become the king. And then the Messiah's teaching and heart and love could have been spread quickly to the whole nation. But when the king himself is corrupt or defiled, then God has no hope that if he sends the Messiah, that king can do what he was supposed to do. So then God divided the kingdom into northern and southern Israel. The northern kingdom had 10 tribes, the southern had 2 tribes. These are the famous 10 lost tribes of Israel. And those 10 tribes were lost. Syria attacked them because they became so corrupt. This is Ahab and Jezebel were king and queen of the northern kingdom of Israel. Of course, Herman Melville uses that image in his book Moby Dick, Captain Ahab. He's using a faithless captain, that is chasing after the white whale. So the Ahab and Jezebel were symbols of corruption and evil in the kingdom. And they were in the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom was relatively pure, though, those 2 tribes. And they were the Judeans. And the word Jewish comes from Judean. So the Jewish people were the Judean people. But what was going on in the north, the reason that there was a conflict was the northern kingdom believed that the temple and the holy city should be Samaria, not Jerusalem. Jerusalem was in the south. So when the kingdom split, the northern kingdom wanted their own temple, and they put their temple in Samaria, and so there were 2 branches of Judaism, or two branches of Israelite history, 2 branches of Hebraism, 2 branches of belief in Moses and the law. There was the northern kingdom centering on Samaria, the Samaritans, and there was the southern kingdom, the Judeans, centering on Jerusalem. The only thing that we've really seen that survived were the Judeans, the Jewish people from which Jesus came. Jesus was born a Jew from Judea. But the Samaritans were actually believers in Moses and the law. They were Israelites. But they did not believe that Jerusalem should be the center. So the Jews, the Judeans, hated them. It's very similar today to what we would call the Protestant-Catholic split. The Protestants and the Catholics, up until 50 years ago really hated each other. The Catholics excommunicated Martin Luther and anyone else who believed that the Pope was not the only source of salvation. So Martin Luther, 500 years ago, had tacked 95 theses on the door in a church in Wittenberg, Germany, complaining about 95 points that the church was doing that were not biblical. And he started the Protestant Reformation. John Calvin continued it in Switzerland with Geneva. He founded the city of Geneva. And Zwingli, another Swiss reformer. And then there were the Anabaptists and the Baptists, and there were the Wesley brothers, the Methodists, and the Quakers and Shakers, and all different kinds of denominations began to spread of Protestant Christianity. The one thing that all Protestants have in common is that they believe that the Bible should be the only source of authority in the church. That you should go back to the Bible, you should read the Bible, you should accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, that your faith in Jesus is what saves you. Not the church, not your baptism in the church, not whether you go to Mass on Sunday or not. Catholics believe that the Bible's important, but that what's more important is that the hierarchy of the church goes back to Peter, the most important disciple of Jesus, and that the papacy and the hierarchy of the church has the authority of God. And that as a good Catholic, you should be obedient to the church's authority. The Bible is secondary. In fact, many Catholics don't read the Bible. Or they only read certain sections of it that the church recommends that they read. In fact, until Vatican II, which was in 1962, the Second Vatican Council, Catholics were prohibited from reading the Bible unless they were training at seminary to be a priest. Because there's so many things in the Bible that are conflicting or difficult to understand, or there's some very racy sections of the Bible. The Book of Solomon, for instance, he's talking about making love to his different women, and how her lips are like ruby and her breasts are like this, and it's actually very sensual. So for many reasons, the Catholics believe the Bible was sort of off limits for the laity, for the common man. That unless you were studying at seminary to be a priest, you had no right to be reading the Bible. It's a very different view, right, of authority. The Catholics believe the authority came from the church. The Protestants believe the authority comes from the Bible and your faith in Jesus Christ. From God's point of view, if you look at Abel and Cain, if you look at a more God-centered view and a more human-centered view, clearly Protestantism is Abel, Catholic is Cain. Protestant is closer to God's point of view, and Catholic is more centering on tradition and liturgy and the church, but it is less to do with the direct personal relationship with Jesus and God. But both of them believe in Jesus. Both of them have the same tradition, essentially, of believing in Christ, and believing in the Bible, and believing in God. The same thing was going on 2,000 years ago. The Jewish people, who were being prepared to receive the first coming of the Messiah, had been split, and the Judeans, the Jews, were the Abel side. They were the ones who believed that the books of Moses and the law was the most important thing, the law of Moses, the Torah, the Old Testament. That's why the Pharisees were very concerned with the law, right? They were always testing Jesus. Are you following the law? Are you believing in the books of Moses? And they kept testing Jesus and testing him and trying to see if he was a bona fide religious leader. Very much like the Protestants today, centering on the Bible. But the Samaritans believed in Moses, and they believed in the law, but they believed in the temple being in Samaria. So Jesus comes across a Samaritan, and it's very interesting to read this. Most Christians, when they read this, don't know this history of Samaria and Samaritans and Jews, and they think the Samaritans are some kind of other religion or other people. They don't realize they're actually Israelites, that they're actually Hebrews, with a different view of God. So it says about Jesus, it says, he left Judea. This is John 4, and we'll start at verse 3. Jesus left Judea and departed again to Galilee. But he needed to go through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. And let me take another digression here to talk about this Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Many people nowadays in America think that the Protestants and Catholics get along just fine. And we know that if you live in a town, or you have Protestant friends, you have Catholic friends, the Protestants and Catholics actually do get along very well now in America for the most part. But it wasn't true 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 300 years ago. When you read Mark Twain, if you read Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer, especially Huckleberry Finn, and he's writing in the late 1800s, he's talking about the Romanists and the Papists, as if they're Satan. The Protestants in this country, and this country was dominated by Protestant culture, the Protestants believed that the people who believed in the Pope were Satanists, that the Pope was Satan. And they wrote in there, you could read tracts and religious literature that said in the Protestant churches in the early 1900s, late 1800s, that basically said the Catholics are Satanists. That they talked about what was happening in the nunneries, that the nunneries were like prostitute houses, that they were like brothels, and they cautioned their children, don't go near the Catholics. And they really terrible. I mean, you could read it in literature in the 1800s how much Protestants hated the Catholics. They thought they were Satan. And the Catholics returned the favor. They excommunicated anyone. If you were Catholic, you were not allowed to set foot in a Protestant church, or upon penalty of excommunication, you'd be kicked out of the Catholic Church if you walked into a Protestant church. That's how little love was lost between Protestant and Catholic. It was later that's why when John F. Kennedy was elected, it was such a big deal. He was the first Catholic that ran for president. I don't know if he was the first Catholic that ran. I think he was, but he was the first Catholic that became president. And John F. Kennedy, in 1960. People were afraid, even in 1960, that the Pope would be running America if John F. Kennedy were elected president. He was the first non-Protestant president of the United States. So you look back at almost 180 years at that point of history, going up until 160, 70 years of history, going back to the first president, George Washington. Every president had been a Protestant until John F. Kennedy. He was the first Catholic president. And there was great debate in America whether we should vote for him, because we were afraid that if he became president, Catholics are sworn to obey the Pope, that America would become a vassal state of Rome. And this was the fear about John F. Kennedy, that America would become controlled by Rome. So this kind of no love lost, interesting that we can see a parallel here. It says, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water?" The reason that Jesus was asking for water is not that he was lazy. It's that there was no little, bucket that goes into the well. It's just a deep pit, and you have to have something to draw water with. So she came to the well with a bucket and a rope, and she was going to drop the bucket and bring it out and pour and bring water out. So that's why he asked her for water. So she says to the woman says to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give to him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water, springing up into everlasting life." So clearly Jesus is speaking about truth and love and his word. He's going to go on to clarify this. But he's speaking about giving living water. It's not, he's using an analogy. He's using a symbol. The water is a symbol of what? Of love, of truth, especially truth. If I give you truth and it goes in you, then the truth always comes out of you then, like living water. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw." So she's still sort of, maybe this is some kind of miracle. I'll be able to drink this water and I'll never be thirsty again, you know. Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered and said, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You have well said, 'I have no husband.' For you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. In that you spoke truly." So he's never met this woman before, and he knows she's had 5 relationships with men, and now the 6th person that she's with now is not her husband, she's just living with him. The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." This is very powerful, very simple teaching of Jesus. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. Many times we men get involved in arguments, debates about what is true. Men love to discuss what is true. Women tend to get less into arguments about what is true and more get into kind of trying to feel the spirit of something, the emotional content of something. And that's why in the Catholic Church, the real faith in the Catholic Church is not in, I feel, I mean, I lived in Italy for 4 years and I saw many priests. There was a real problem even then of homosexuality in the priesthood. When I was in the Vatican, when I was in Rome, most of the Americans I met who were studying at in Rome, which is the highest seminary to study in, right? It's the place you would go to fulfill your studies as a Catholic, to spend time in Rome. All the Americans that I saw studying there were homosexual, to be getting ready for the priesthood. Very strong, actually, homosexuals. And I saw that and I realized that the church had a problem. This was back in the 1990s, that many homosexuals were going into the church because they could feel that they could live there without accusation of being a bachelor. You know, in America we used to talk about homosexuals as being bachelors. You know, oh, he's a bachelor. You know, the idea of a confirmed bachelor was a kind of a smokescreen for the man who was homosexual. You know, he was a bachelor. He didn't have a wife or children. But there was always a question. You know, what is he? You know, what is he really? And but as a priest, you're free from that questioning. And I think many homosexuals go into the priesthood. And so when I was there, you know, there was a real, I could already see that there was that kind of problem. But I felt that men go into priesthood, but I saw the Catholic women, and I saw this not just in Italy, but I saw this in Los Angeles, when I was living in the Southwest, in Los Angeles, or in Arizona, or in Texas, where I spent about 6 years. I saw hundreds of thousands of Catholics. 99%. The men were very devout in a certain sense. Like they would have tattoos, like the Mexicans had tattoos of the Virgin Mary, you know, or Our Lady of Guadalupe. You know, they had these tattoos, and they loved pendants with the Our Lady of Guadalupe, this kind of thing. But it was the women who would go to church every Sunday, who would go to Mass, who would pray. They had spiritual experiences with Jesus, with Mary, with the saints. So for Catholics, their relationship with God is much more of a spiritual kind of nature through the women. The women, even Our Lady of Guadalupe, even all Our Lady of Lourdes, all the different Catholic holy sites were discovered by women. Women had seen a vision of Mary. All these women had seen visions of Mary or visions of saints. What I found, in other words, was that the women were carrying the Catholic Church. The women were the ones who really were carrying it. So, I think that when we talk about spirit and truth, God is spirit, Jesus said. And those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So he's teaching a universal teaching here. He does say salvation is of the Jews, because he knows that God had prepared the Judeans, the southern Israelites, to receive the Messiah. That he was the Messiah and he had come to Judea. So that's the place that God had chosen. But he's talking to a Samaritan woman, and he's teaching her how to find salvation. He's saying in the future, no one's going to go to Jerusalem or this mountain that you worship on. But people are going to go directly to the Father and worship him in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. So you can see that Samaritans were not that different from the Jews. They really are basically the same people. Just they're fighting each other so badly, they're hating each other. Like many times brothers fight each other much more fiercely, much more intensely than people who don't know each other, right? If you look at Northern Ireland, they're killing each other, right? If you look at Serbia and Croatia and Bosnia, these are people who live together for thousands of years, and they hate each other, and they're killing each other, ethnic purging, right? You look at the Middle East, the Muslims and the Jews, or the Arabs and the Jews. That situation goes back to Abraham. Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Isaac became the father of Jacob, the father of Israel. Ishmael became the father of the Arabic people. They're brothers. So, many times brothers fight more than people who don't know each other. When you don't know someone, they're just strangers. But when you really know someone, you can really get angry at them, right? True? Your own sisters? You can really fight, with people that you know well. So this is what was going on between the Samaritans and the Jews. So Jesus does say salvation is of the Jews, but the hour is coming when all that's going to be finished. So he's already predicting a future beyond Israel, beyond the Jewish people. He's predicting a future when Israel's united, for one thing, that Samaria and Judea will be reunited. And that God will bring his word to the people, not just of Israel, but of all the world, through his teaching. So she believes in the Messiah. She says he's coming and he will tell all things. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. I who speak to you am he. I'm the Messiah. And at this point, his disciples came. So he was alone at that point, but his disciples arrived. And they marveled that he talked with a woman. For a rabbi to speak to a woman, not acceptable.
I know what he means. Yeah.
Yeah. They marveled that he spoke to a woman. Yet no one said, what do you seek? Or why are you talking with her? The woman then left her water pot, went her way into the city, and said to the men, come, see a man who told me all things that I ever did. Could this be the Christ? So she begins to witness to her village, her town, her city, to these Samaritans, that the Messiah has come. Then they went out of the city and came to him. In the meantime, his disciples urged him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat of, which you do not know. So again, same thing with the living, everlasting water, the living water. He's not talking about food. I have food that you do not know. Therefore the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him anything to eat? Again, they're looking at it materialistically. Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. So he wants to do God's will. There's so much more. It's wonderful. John is a wonder. You can tell how rich it is. There's so much, to talk about. But we'll stop there. But it's very interesting that Jesus was already predicting a future when God's will would not be seen in a narrow sectarian way by the Jews as the Jerusalem's the center and you have to worship God in Jerusalem at the temple, or the Samaritans who say, no, this mountain is the holy mountain of God, you have to worship God on this mountain. You know, even today we find that people think that you have to worship God in a church, or you have to go to this church, or you have to come to my church, or you have to belong to this synagogue, or you have to go to this mosque, or you have to believe in this. Or if you're not believing in this philosophy, you're not cool. Or if you don't believe in this particular way of thinking, you're not hip, you're not right. But what Jesus was saying was very clear. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. And so we have this home church movement here, that we make our home into a church, that we make our home into the place that God can dwell most brightly, most beautifully. Why? The family, can you come up, love?
Yes.
Well, we're going to do this together. We forgot. We'll do it next week, okay? The family, a man and a woman together, is the most beautiful thing in the universe. Because the man and woman represent the full expression of God's nature. When God created, and again, I'll grab the Bible for this one, but in Genesis, God created everything and said it was good, and then he created man and said it was very good. But then he said it's not good that the man be alone, and he made Eve, it says. And then he said it was, great. In Genesis 1, he said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, over cattle, over all earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So the word man here does not mean man as in a man as opposed to a woman. It means humankind. And it says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So we're created in the image of God. And so we have a beautiful spirit, actually. Inside of us, there's a beautiful spirit. And if we can uncover that beautiful spirit and remove our sin, our selfishness, and our fallen nature, and we can, especially, this is the key point. Men and women, we saw this in the Kavanaugh hearings, the Judge Brett Kavanaugh hearings. We saw the divide now that's so deep, to the rift between men and women in this country. How much hatred there is. That women are basically saying that men there's no good men in the world. That all men are basically evil. And that they're not to be trusted. And they're digging up, and men are like, yeah, I like women. And I'm attracted to women. But there's no proper way to express that attraction without being seen as a predator. Or being seen as some kind of an evil person. Even today, it's called sexual harassment. If you even say you look nice today, it could be considered misconstrued. You have to be careful what you say. What are you saying? I look nice. Are you trying to hit on me? Are you trying to pick up on me? Are you making a pass at me? What are you doing? There's such hostility between men and women. Such distrust. We've reached this point in history. But actually, that is very interesting. That wall, if we can go over that wall, if we can love each other, the secrets of the universe are unlocked. This is the place that the secrets of the universe are unlocked. This is where God is unlocked. Because when a man and a woman can love each other truly, sin is gone. Sin can only exist when a man and a woman cannot love each other. But when a man and woman can love each other truly, that is the end of sin. That is what the Messiah came to give us. That's what the true parents, Father, came to give us. Was a man and a woman loving each other without sin. Truly loving each other, open and love. This is why Father instituted the blessing of men and women, so that men and women could be rejoined, reconnected. After 6,000 biblical years and probably 80,000 real years of horrible human history of men and women's relationship being just horrible. This is why I can preach the gospel, the good news. Gospel means good news. The gospel of this age is that men and women now have a chance to come to God together as a couple and to meet God and to remove their sin, to become sinless. This is our future. This is the world that we're going toward. So I hope that at home and here you can join us, that your home should be the church. Your home should be the place that God can dwell most fully. See, Christians and Jews and Muslims think that you have to go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque because they know that in the relationship between man and woman, God is not dwelling the way it should, the way God should. And so they go to a building which has been consecrated or made holy. In other words, a building that is like, what can I say? It's like it's a place that we can say we don't want to do anything evil here. So that everyone goes in there and, like everyone puts on their best clothing for church and they put on their best attitudes for church. But then if they go home, they start cursing again and they're doing things that they shouldn't do. But they go to church and they go home and they relax and they beat themselves again. They go to church or they go to synagogue or they go to mosque. But we should be living with God 24 hours a day. We should be living with God every minute. If we are, we don't need churches anymore. We don't need synagogues. We don't need mosques. We don't need places of worship. If we're living with God 24 hours a day, then wherever I am is church. And the most holy place is the place that my family is. And most people understand this intuitively. They say a man's home is his castle. Or, they protect their home as if this is my private zone, my zone of hope, my zone of, rest. But shouldn't that be where God is? Shouldn't that be the most holy place? And so, when we hold hands, when we love each other, and especially, and I'm sorry if you are offended by this at home or here, but when we make love, the moment a man and a woman make love with God at the center, so that both of them feel each other's spirit fully, and they feel God's spirit at the center of their relationship when they're making love, that is the most holy place of all. That is the place that God is most excited to be. My wife was talking about this last week. How could I prove that? Because when a man and woman's sexual organs come together, men like it, women like it, but does that have anything to do with God necessarily? It doesn't have to. I mean, if you have a prostitute and a man, or, we talked about rape, and we talked about, with Kavanaugh, all this discussion about rape and the abuse of women. Just because a man's penis goes into a woman's vagina doesn't mean it's a holy act at all, right? It doesn't imply that at all. But when God is there, when the man and woman are truly loving each other, and their spirits are going into each other too, and there's a oneness of spirit and body, and a child is conceived at that moment, each of you kids, you were born there.
Yeah, hallelujah.
When your Appa's seed met your mother's egg inside her womb, that's where you come from. So if God chose that moment to create life, it shows you how much God and the universe value sexual relationship. That it's the place that life comes from. And so, it is holy. It is holy. And it should be treated as holy. And that's why we have a problem with promiscuity and sexual relationship just for pleasure. Because it's not taking into account the holiness of it. That it should have it should be imbued with holiness. But the only one who can make it holy is you. Yes. It's not holy by itself. We talked about before. If there's rape or prostitution and men and women are paying each other to just get off, as they say, like a man is just doing it to get off, it's not holy. But if a man and a woman really love each other and have dedicated their lives to each other, and then that act is seen as the culmination of their love, then that becomes holy. And if you bring God into it with prayer and your own searching, and of course, you're growing closer to God. So it's not like, oh, I'm done. God is here, it's finished. We are constantly developing our relationship with God. And so the holy act of love can become even more holy, even more holy. We have to invest in it, our mind as well as our body. When our mind and our body come together, if you have 2 minds and 2 bodies, right? So there's 4 different things that are being dealt with here. The woman's mind, the man's mind, the woman's body, the man's body. Sometimes, right, people are making love and their mind is somewhere else. Or they're fantasizing about something. Or they're not really there. They're not really with that person. They're not really communicating physically and spiritually between the man and woman's spirit. That's not going to be true love then. True love is where the minds come together, the bodies come together, the mind and bodies come together. All these things are joining, and then life comes from that moment. Possibly. There's a possible conception there. And then the children come from that. And so you don't think God is going to be there too? So God, man, woman, children, all meeting at this one point.
Yep.
That's holy. That's fantastic. Yep. And that's the gospel.
Yeah, hallelujah.
Hallelujah. That's the good news of this age. So, do you want to add anything, honey?
Oh, yeah. It's an explosion of the love life lineage. It's the secret.
Yeah.
You know. Until the true Father, even in the moon, expressed to us to understand, we never understand. Even we received the blessing, we didn't know what mean the blessing so long.
Yeah.
But every day asking to God and pray, and God giving you little by little, because we have a spirit to grow, maturity. You was born the baby to the adult, but the body can grow that naturally if you eat and sleep and living, but our spirit doesn't grow without God's truth and true love to feed our spirit. If you feel your love, and mostly and we see difference, you know. If you damage your heart to somebody hate you or somebody saying bad things, your heart is crumbling down to receive anything, you know. That our heart is very sensitive and very damageable. That's why encourage other people to support each other to grow well is with a loving heart and say good things, and then children can believe, you know. Everybody wants to be beautiful, everybody wants to be happy, but reality with each of us sometimes, you know, say bad things to each other. That is we have to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've all been damaged. So it's hard to believe in what I'm talking about. This is an ideal. But we've all been damaged. So when you're damaged, your first line of defense is cynicism, you know. It's sort of like sarcasm, you know. We get sarcastic and try to push people away because it's hard to be sincere and people think you're naive if you're this open-hearted, this idealistic. People think you're naive. So we have to be pure-hearted. But Jesus said you must be as wise as serpents, but as gentle as lambs. In other words, you have to have that gentle, naive heart, but you have to also be aware that people in the world are not going to trust you, or not going to, and they're not going to believe that you're true, or that you're loving, and they're going to try to trick you and hurt you. So he was aware of both sides. But let's try our best to find that beautiful, original, ideal heart and share that with another person. And if you would like to find that other person and you don't know where to find them, contact me, because I'm trying to I want our home church to become a clearinghouse for beautiful, heartistic and loving and warm people. In other words, that people can come to us and we can help teach how to open your heart again and how to heal your heart again and become a loving person. And then if I have dozens and dozens of people, and my friends and colleagues in the unification movement have thousands of people that they are also sharing with and preparing to receive the blessing, we can perhaps help you to find someone who is a good match for you and someone who can complement your nature, your character, your heart, and help you to continue your journey together as a couple. So that's the whole goal of our movement, is to make happy families. So that's our goal here in this home church in Gorham, New Hampshire. I hope you can join us.
Yep.
And thank you so much for joining us today
Thank
for our
you.
sermon. Let's pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for loving our family, for the beautiful, pure essence of love. You are Spirit, Father, and we worship you in spirit and truth. Many times we men love to talk about things and fight for what is true. Jesus was like that. He spoke the truth and argued and spoke what was true. And women sometimes are more sensitive to love and what is the feeling of something and the spirit of something. And so we men and women need each other because our sensitivities, our awareness of you and how you are, Father, is different. And by being together and loving each other, the whole universe opens up, Father. And it's so wonderful. We're so grateful, Father, to have you as our Father, or as our parent. The whole universe is our mother. And we want, Father, to be able to join together as men and women and bring the universe together with you, that we can represent the universe, man and woman, together in love. That our children can feel that we as parents represent you, Father, as true parents. Thank you so much for this day. We ask your blessing on everyone and offer everything in the name of Raman and Tamiko Montanaro, a blessed central family. 축복 중심 가정, 라만과 타미코 몬타나리 이름으로 포고드립니다. 아주. 아멘.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.